Yeah, let's talk about the syllabus guides because I think we were talking about these earlier in relation to trigger warnings, um, and how they call it, I think this was in a different part, in part two, the vindictive protectiveness, where we try to um, protect people from their, triggers, sensitive topics, but are we causing them psychological harm and not really preparing them for the real world by censoring sensitive topics? And I would think that um, the critique of like the Title IX law is that it's kind of vague and far-reaching, and certain professors have had to take out pieces of their curriculum because they're afraid someone's going to have a problem with it and that's going to affect their job. Um, so they just, you know, they're not going to talk about rape or sexual assault altogether because they're afraid that that's going to impact them. But again, is that absence of that conversation adding to this myth of the mainstream, right? Where now people aren't going to be talking about that. Luckily, we've had this Me Too movement, which is making that more part of the mainstream, putting more attention on that problem that we have of sexual violence. But again, there's been critiques on how Title IX is that it can also have a negative impact on those conversations, and limit them from happening altogether. So there's that syllabus guide in part 3, which I think is important to point out. And if we I want to talk about social media a little bit too. And self-censorship. I know we've done that, but I think the role of the media or social media has been that it's hardened people's views and positions and been more polarizing than bringing people together and bridging diverse groups to have conversations about community survival, for example. They also talked about microaggressions. So I think that's another important term to consider in relation to someone's self-confidence. Attacking an individual's contribution. The ability for someone to identify within a group. They may get called out on their speech for not using the right pronoun and feel like less welcome in a group, or like a subculture. Have either of you felt like you had to self-censor, or someone got called out for using a certain term that they considered derogatory?
I have seen it around, but I haven't personally. I mean, as far as I know, I don't remember,
Mm-hmm.
but for myself, but I have seen like people do it.
Right.
Recently.
Yeah. And I think
I,
there's. Go
I,
ahead.
I was going to say that I've seen it a lot in different churches too. Like people don't welcome anybody that's really, they're not warm, there's no warmness with anybody that has like their sexuality and stuff. I've seen that, and I been called out by one of my ex-boyfriend's mom. Said that all black people do drugs,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I don't do drugs.
Yeah.
I'm black.
Right.
I seen that, but stuff like that, I think it's more people that are very ignorant. That don't understand like the race and stuff. Because she was born in Scotland and she's been around people that are from Scotland. Not she's been in America for so long, but then she turns on the TV and sees all these black people watch Cops, and you get your perspective by watching Cops. And I think Cops is kind of fake anyway. So, but it's just I think it's more like people what they see on TV, and then what the media, what the television points out, and that's what it's there. It's just like how you mean, like say the Cosby Show, for instance. The Cosby Show is like a black family that has a success and have a mom and dad in the home. I didn't have a mom. I mean, a mom and dad in the home. I had just my mom. So I never understood. It's just like it's so biased, just because, like it's so much to even explain. But it's just all of that just makes me sick to my stomach, and hearing all these negative about certain people, their religion, and whatever. People are people. That's what I mean.
Right. And I think that's a good example. Your ex's mother, I think she probably was just ignorant, right? I don't think she would say that to hurt your feelings, but maybe she felt like she was in a safe space and you were open-minded to her views.
Oh no, I didn't hear it. My ex-boyfriend told me.
Oh, okay.
I didn't hear it. If she said it, I would have hit her.
Okay. So, again, like, I think it is kind of a microaggression, maybe, like by saying it. I think that statement that she had, that all Black people do drugs, was inappropriate and racist.
Right.
But again, I think it was ignorance driving that, and not necessarily hate. And that I'm glad that she didn't maybe approach you about that.
Because I wouldn't be sitting here today if that happened.
Yeah, but maybe though you played a role in changing her mind. Her just having met you changed her mind to a degree.
I don't know. I don't know. She didn't like me because I was Black. Period. So
I think sometimes it's just gonna be the bigger person. Just like, I know it's hard to ignore people, but sometimes for me, I just kind of tend just to ignore it. But I mean, it's gonna happen regardless. But at least I know I feel better just by ignoring it. But some people don't ignore certain things, but you can't let everything slide either. So, but
yeah, and I think that statement of hers, you wouldn't let slide, and that's where part one and kind of what we talked about, speaking up and how to speak up and echo certain things, is important in that setting. But I think microaggressions kind of are less obvious statements that someone might say that people find offense. So I think that has to deal more with, the mainstream media, or the myth of the mainstream, and people being sheltered and not being exposed to different groups and diversity. That's just a byproduct. But if we are overly critical and don't try to understand their viewpoint and just attack it, then we don't really, there's no learning that happens. There's no bridge being built.
Because I know I mean, it happened to me, I would have probably, either spoke up about it. Because that's like, to me, that's one thing, as being Black, sometimes you're not allowed. It feels like you're not allowed to say certain things because you're Black or whatever. That's how I feel. But I mean, sometimes for me, it's hard to like speak up to like things like that because I don't know how I would word it. I mean, I get with family, it's like they like to cuss out people. And I try to not do that because it doesn't, it doesn't solve everything, or violence doesn't solve everything either.
Mm-hmm.
But at least I try to like hear them out, like on their point of view, why you did this or why you said that.
Yeah.
But that's also kind of hard to do that too.
Yeah. And because we don't know, the way everyone's brain is wired is different.
Yeah.
So I want to tie this back, going back to the question of how is this similar to the stigma or exclusion of people with disabilities or intellectual developmental disabilities?
Mhm.
So someone who maybe has autism that has been more sheltered, or maybe they're growing up in a foreign country and English is a second language, right? They call that like a triple handicap. They might have a problem speaking up or expressing their views without being attacked, because they lack a theory of mind due to autism or just being sheltered in their insular community. So I think we need to stand up to racist speech and rhetoric, but also balance that with free speech and how people who are neurodiverse and how they would maybe engage with some of these topics. So like one example that I think was in part 5 of this research was someone making a comment. So say there's like a man with autism and he makes a comment to a woman saying she looks very attractive, and that maybe can fall into like the Title IX, like sexist language speech, and he can get in trouble or get suspended from the college for offering that compliment. But for him, maybe he doesn't know if it's welcomed or unwelcomed until after he says it, because that's just how his brain is wired. It's more of like a systematic mindset maybe that they have. So yeah, I think that is why some of this is important to discuss.
Do you think that's a bad thing if somebody says that you look nice today, or?
I think it depends how it's said. Yeah, but some people, they don't have a filter, right? They don't say it the right way, or maybe in their country and the way it's translated, it isn't a very sexual compliment, but maybe the way that it comes across in English, it's a little hypersexualized, and that can be offensive to someone, or they can consider it falling into that Title IX because it's more vague. So I think these are all really good discussions to have about censorship and free speech and community survival and these different kinds of capital. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I was thinking about, cause my brother has autism, and everything, and right now it's a tough thing right now because my brother doesn't have any friends, so he kind of comes to me. But I was thinking about what he did in high school. When first camera phones were coming out, so when my mom bought us camera phones and stuff, so he started taking pictures of different people's butts, and so I guess a girl caught him catching a picture of his taking a picture of her butt. So my mom had to go up there and talk to because the people that the girl that he took a picture of her butt didn't speak that good of English, and their parents didn't speak any English. So so what happened was that they just let it slide because it just says, oh, he just didn't know because he had a disability in this. So that's what made me think about that. And he has a hard time keeping friends and trust issues and stuff. And so it's a lot harder on him and everything, and he doesn't go out and doesn't want to do anything with anybody with disabilities, and it's frustrating and it's hard on me a little bit because it's like I can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
But right now it's a handful, a little bit of a
Yeah, yeah.
handful.
Well,
Um,
yeah, so that kind of falls into the caregiver responsibilities maybe you have now supporting him, right?
and not really a caregiver, but it's just he'll do what he wants, and I can tell him not to do it, and he'll do the opposite, and then he gets in more trouble, and it
Yeah,
just stresses me out. So it's like, so
yeah.
I'm just like the point that he needs to just make some friends, and I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, right. He needs to find his group and his people. But that's harder to access today with all this
Yeah.
censorship, you know. But I'm glad that he wasn't punished for that, because I think he needs some detailed feedback on why that's not acceptable. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why it's important to um, have these different accommodations for speech and actions, maybe surrounding Title
Yeah.
IX, because right, he could have had, right, it's that empathizing and that systematic thinking. They kind of the systematic thinking is a little bit higher, I think, in people with autism, and they're maybe lacking in that empathizing way, or they lack the sensory experience to express themselves appropriately, or um, so yeah, thanks for sharing that example. I think we are kind of at the end of this topic, but I think we'll maybe end with just talking about safe spaces, because I think if there was a place for your brother where he can find like-minded people, and bond with other people, he could get that um, nuanced advice that would he can absorb better, and not maybe just shut you down because you have a different way of thinking.
Yeah. So before my mom been forcing me to try to find some meetups and stuff for people that have the same problems or his interest and everything. So I found one back in January, and I went with him to the group a lot, because it's like because they all have autism and they all have different levels, and they all have like some of them are married, and he wants that life too. And so that helps, but it doesn't. But with this quarantine stuff, I'm not. I mean, they're trying to meet up and everything, and they're trying to do it virtual, but he doesn't. My brother doesn't like have internet in this house, so it makes it frustrating. So waiting for it to kind of ease up a little bit, and then he can go to this group, and then maybe I'll just step back and then let him make his friends. That was the whole purpose of trying to get him in his groups. So it's
Yeah,
just harder now.
yeah, because I think that's so important for people to find their group, because then you have that healing experience, or a social corrective experience, where you're around people where you can be yourself and have a better self-understanding through that relationship you have with someone else who maybe thinks more similarly to you. So I think the more we can find those safe spaces that aren't to restrict people who are diverse within those group, and right, like um, you're triggering me by using that pronoun, so you're not going to be welcome in this safe space, right? Like, they don't really serve that purpose of calling people out with microaggressions a safe space. I don't see it fulfilling that purpose, but it can be, the intention can be hijacked for that purpose of like
Right.
being closing out people who are trying to belong and fit in, but maybe don't express or use the right words, right? That's what a safe space should be, is where can people find that healing experience to help expand their self-understanding, because that's how people are able to be more self-determined and go after the things that they want and have a higher quality of life if they can kind of follow their interests and have a better self-understanding and feel more confident in themselves and the way that they are and accepted. So cool. I'm glad we kind of covered some different examples. I think that was really helpful. So every supervisor has a different style and approach, and some of those are going to be better for one person and better for someone else. So, all right, you want to teach what to do, maybe rather than what not to do. That's another bullet on here.
I was going to I was going to say that with job coaches, some of them I had two in my lifetime. One of them was very, never really talked down to me. But she kind of like talked me out of some stuff, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think she kind of doubted your ability.
Pretty much. And so just trying to find jobs. I mean, I started having her like January 2009 or something, and no, March of 2009. And so she just thought me being in like I wanted to do office, be an office assistant or something. So she just like showed me how to do it and stuff, and she's like, it's not possible for me to do it. So basically, kind of like downgraded me, if I could say.
Yeah, right. So I think we're getting better. 2009, that was a little over 10 years ago. So I think culturally we've made some progress, maybe because like I said in a previous video, those people on the employment team, those supporting professionals, like they're not free of that bias too. They can have bias as well, right? So, so yeah.
And then when I was at my other job coach, she was so this was in 2017. She was more like encouraging and said, what do you really want to do? And I told her, and then we always, she never put me down, and so it made me feel hopeful until I got in my first instance. So I couldn't find another job, couldn't find a job because of my two incidents. But she worked with me until it's like, it's kind of pointless now. Since you're not going to be able to work for a while, then you got to close out your case. So, but I loved her a lot more than my other one because she was so like encouraging and not make me feel like it's hopeless for me to get a job.
Yeah, and I think every leadership style maybe serves its purpose in a time and place, or depending on the individual, they might need someone who's a little bit more of a taskmaster, or what's the word I'm thinking of, drill sergeant type, or versus someone who's a little bit more inspiring, and providing more of that transformational leadership style, versus something that's maybe more transactional. Well, if you do this, you're gonna get to take your break sooner, right? A little tit for tat. So everyone kind of has their own style and like what's gonna motivate them. Is it a reward, or is it knowing that you did a job well?
And I was going to mention this too. Like when I came back to the gallery, so my mentor Chris let me help her with some administration stuff, and it was good that she gave me a chance to do that, and it was wasn't as hard as it sounded to be. and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So, but Brittany probably has something.
Yeah. Well, it's good you had a choice, right? Because that is going to just make you more independent. And sometimes our choices are wrong or we're not ready for something. But having that dignity to fail is a really important thing to being a human and growing up and understanding yourself. So very cool. The article also talked about all of the decision making involving people with disabilities. I kind of called this a voice mandate. Both of you being involved in this program, I think, is important because you both self-identify with a disability, and I think that is this idea of this voice mandate, which I think is a moral idea that, well, of course, people with disabilities should be involved in that decision making. So I think that is a good example of moral capital. Okay, I've got two more terms.
Okay.
Unless you, I didn't know if you were going to say something there.
Yeah, I was. So, you know, being in this program is very helpful for me because, you know, I worked since I was 16, and I've seen the good and the bad of working, and it helps me to, you know, try to inform people with disabilities, also to, you know, say how you feel. Don't shut down just because if they don't understand you, there's somebody that will understand you. And it's like if you have a caregiver or your family, if you're close with a friend, you can always talk to them and they can help you, talk you through helping you with your job, and then your job coach. And it's very important, I believe it is very important for people that have a disability to have a job coach, because then they can be your voice, to a voice and everything. So it's just the idea of, you know, being in the work field. You want to make your extra money because you have bills, and disability can only give you so much.
Right.
And so it's just, I think everybody that has a disability, can be mental, physical, intellectual, whatever, it's needed. And it doesn't matter with the age.
Right.
So that's what I strongly believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you, Jocelyn, you're like a peer advocate, maybe in some ways. Maybe you see yourself as a mentor in some ways. But I think all of that is really important, to have people who are like me that sort of understand what maybe I went through or I'm going through, and to give me that advice. So mentoring too can be done more inclusively if you allow for more choice making to happen, by being able to maybe pick someone who you identify with more if you are being given a mentor. So you can find someone who has or understands that cultural capital that maybe you bring to the table, because maybe your culture or your being is sort of similar and you can relate more to that person. So
I was going to say, I never thought of myself as being someone's mentor. I feel like I'm not, maybe it's because I'm like self-conscious too, is I don't feel that. I just know by experience, and I can just give advice, but mentoring, I wouldn't make a good mentor. I'm still learning myself.
yeah.
So,
Well, life's like, it's a never-ending process of learning, but I would say you would make a good mentor, because you're a thinker, like you said to me one of the first days we met. You have a lot of good ideas, and sometimes being a teacher or being a mentor isn't giving someone the idea, but you're saying something that makes them think about their problem in a different way. And it's like pulling the answer outside, pulling the answer that's within them. And I think you can do that just through being there to listen, and really understand maybe what the person's going through. So it's cool.
I was gonna say something.
Yeah.
I believe like this as being like necessary not being a mentor, but it's like if you have somebody that's willing to help and you learn as you go, you know.
Yeah.
Like for me, sometimes when you and I talk about certain things, also, I mean, I see you as a sister, not a friend, but like you have helped me like several times. That's not necessarily being a mentor, but that's just like being somebody that cares, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if we can self-select a mentor or friend or advocate, based on whatever our goals are, that's going to help us the most, because maybe you want someone who understands you from a cultural perspective more. And that's going to help you with feeling better about yourself or more confident in a job or elsewhere in the community. But maybe you just have a question about how to use YouTube most effectively. And so maybe you need someone who's more of a specialist. And so being able to lead with your goals and who you are and pick those people to help you, especially if you're looking at like a specialist, I would say that's accessing that social capital more. It's like finding someone who is the expert, really developed in that theory of mind on how to use YouTube and get the most viewers. That's more of a social capital idea. So I think mentoring, that idea of multi-level mentoring that's more self-selected, can benefit from this idea of looking at social versus cultural capital, and moral capital being what maybe bridges both of those together. So thank you for both sharing. So people out there, a lot of life experiences that lead people into being who they are, and if we can understand that idea, then we're accessing more of that cultural capital. So the last term I have here is the neurodiversity policy. We already talked a lot about, but I'd see that as serving both a moral capital, in being a tool to bridge different types of people in an organization. But it's also a little bit with physical capital too, because I think it is protecting people and working as a safety net for some people by having that policy. So that idea of community survival and physical survival, it's really bridging all of these different ideas of capital together. So we will have like a Q&A form on our website where we're making this video available, where we can maybe get some questions from people that we can maybe answer in a different video about some of this information we've talked about today or in previous videos. So if you two don't have anything else to say, I'll say thanks for watching. And until next time.